this is where we even get into a story that is kind of hard to believe. And I guess, we're getting long here, so I think we're going to turn this into a two-part episode. But before we get to that, I want to finish by telling a story. And I don't know, I'm curious if other people have had a similar experience. But the story is, I was struggling so much at this job, and I had a therapist and a psychiatrist, and I would see them all the time. And they were like, you seem like you need time off. Like you seem quite depressed, and the drugs are helping, but not enough. And so they were like, we'll write you a note, give you 6 weeks off or however much you need to just recover and not worry about work. And in California, this is absolutely a protected thing. If you need to take time off for medical reasons, this is perfectly fine. It's a, protected situation. I don't know what you actually call it, but legally, if you go into a job, at least this type of job, and hand them a note saying, hey, I need to take time off for medical reasons, they don't have to pay you during this time necessarily, but it's totally a thing you can do. And so they're like, yeah, we'll give you a note. The note doesn't have to say what the medical reasons are. And that was important to me because I didn't feel safe at this place. I didn't really trust my boss or the CTO with this information at all. I just didn't have a good feeling about it. And so they're like, yeah, this will just say you need time off for medical reasons. And in California, you actually pay a small tax on your income to cover medical disability. So in California, if you need time off for a medical reason, the state will actually, pay part of your income. And so I was like, wow, this sounds perfect. I can recover. I can just take the time off I need to get over my burnout or whatever it is. And I will still get enough money to survive. I'm not really paying off my debt so much, but at least I can eat and pay rent and stuff. And so I went into work and I told my boss, I was like, hey, I got this note, I need to take 6 weeks off. I'm sorry, but it's just how it goes. And my boss was like, okay, fine. And then a half hour later, the CTO comes over to my desk and says, hey, can I talk to you? And I was like, sure. And so we go into his office, and this is still hard for me to tell. And he sits me down, and he's kind of sitting up on his desk, sort of towering over me. And he's like, why do you need this time off? And I'm like, in my head, it's like, wait, what? I thought, and so at least in California, you are absolutely not allowed to ask about people's medical conditions. This is absolutely, it is completely illegal to ask anyone specifics. And so I was like, I need it for medical reasons. And they're like, yeah, I know that. What are the medical reasons? They straight up asked me, and I was like, not at all prepared for that. I'm like, wait, what? In my head, I'm just like, what's going on? But I felt trapped. I was like, I need this job. I can't lose this job. I literally can't. I don't know what I would do. I need the income. And so I felt like I had to tell them. I absolutely did not want to tell them. They absolutely should not have been asking me, both for legal reasons, and I think a common human courtesy. You don't ask people specifics about their medical conditions like this, especially in a position of power. At least that's my opinion. Even if it wasn't illegal. Anyways, so they were like, and so they asked me this, and I told them, I'm like, well, I have bipolar disorder, and I need the time off. And I thought in my head, okay, phew. I really didn't want to tell him that, but I guess I had to, and I'll just do what I got to do to get through this. But I'm sure that'll be the end of it. That was not the end of it. they seemed to be getting very angry, and they were like raising their voice, and they're like, well, what are you doing about it? And I was like, what do you mean? What am I doing about it? Like, what in the world is going on, you know? And they just started essentially yelling at me, like, what do you take? Like, how are you dealing with it? How are you treating it? You know? And I'm like, medication, you know? And I'm like, I don't want to tell them anything. What medication? What are you taking? And so they're like drilling me on it. And I felt like I had to tell them. So it still makes me feel horrible even recounting this experience, because it just seems so wrong from a human perspective, you know? But that's what it was. I told them, and they were very angry with me, but I think legally they couldn't, you know, you can't fire somebody for that. You know, that would be like super bad. Like you could absolutely sue them easily for that, I think. And so I think they knew that. So they were just started pushing the boundary as far as it would go. And they ended up letting me do it, but that was horrible. After that experience, it was like, wow, do I never want to come into work at this place again. That was horrible. And yeah, so I'm really curious if, you know, I'm not asking for anyone's medical history, but if you're listening to this and you've ever had a sort of experience like this with a workplace pressuring you in any sort of mental health or not even mental health, but just health related stuff, I'd be really curious to hear if, you know, there were experiences like this. Again, not pushing for any sort of personal information or details, absolutely. But, you know, it's one of those things where I'm curious how unusual it is. And I suspect, after having worked a number of jobs, that this is probably more on the extreme end. But I think a lot of places might tend more towards the way this company works versus the first one. And I can tell you this, as someone struggling with these things, this type of response does the opposite of what anything you could possibly be wanting. You know, if you want me to be a good worker, you know, supporting the things that I need to be a good worker is way more productive than making me feel like crap and making me feel like I suck at life, you know? So, you know, my advice, if you are ever in a position of power in these situations, you know, I think most people would be happy to be accommodating, you know, and work with you with whatever they're dealing with to try to fit into the work environment. But if you are just trying to squash people and, you know, make it seem like their problems aren't real problems, you're only making things worse for yourself. Like, I'm not going to come back and be more ready to work in this type of environment, you know? Whereas if their response had been like, oh, yeah, take all the time you need, whatever you need, we want to support you, we want, you know, if it had been a supportive response, it would have been like, wow, okay, great. This is, you know, I don't love everything about this place, but at least they're supporting me here. And, you know, I'll come back and do my best work and do what I can. And, you know, that is I think, a much better, much more productive response for everyone involved.